There are moments in a courtroom when the air seems to hold its breath, when a single story forces everyone to confront what love truly means and what happens when it disappears. This was one of those mornings. A morning when an expensive dress and a trembling hospital gown stood side by side, revealing a truth far heavier than any legal charge. Madison Whitmore walked into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, draped in luxury, every step polished, every accessory gleaming with the confidence of someone who had never been forced to choose between right and wrong. Behind her, in a wheelchair that seemed too small for a lifetime of memories, sat her mother, Dorothy Whitmore, 74 years old, wrapped in a thin gown that did nothing to hide her confusion or her fear. You could feel the question rising inside the room like a quiet storm. How does a daughter who once held her mother's hand now turn away from her so easily, and deeper still? What breaks first in a family, the money or the love? Judge Caprio watched them both carefully, the way a father might watch two generations of the same story. He had seen greed before. He had seen loneliness. But rarely had he seen them stand this close together, dressed so differently, speaking so loudly, without saying a word. This case wasn't just about property or paperwork. It was about the silent wounds that form when loyalty is traded for convenience, when a parent becomes a burden instead of a blessing, and when the world's oldest bond, the bond between mother and child, begins to fracture. If you believe no parent deserves to be forgotten, stay with us. What unfolds next is a lesson in love, justice, and the courage it takes to put dignity back where it belongs. The story truly began the moment Madison Whitmore entered the courtroom, though she moved as if nothing were beginning at all. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman who believed life had already chosen her side. Her $3,000 dress shimmered under the courtroom lights, her diamond earrings catching every glimmer like small declarations of status. She held her Louis Vuitton bag close, not with affection, but with the ease of someone who had never needed to worry about what anything cost. But behind her, several steps back, as though intentionally out of sight, Dorothy Whitmore arrived in a wheelchair pushed gently by a court aide. 74 years old. Fragile, wrapped in a thin hospital gown that seemed far too cold for the warmth she once gave her family. Her silver hair fell loosely around her face, unbrushed. Her eyes searched the room as though trying to recognize a life she used to belong to. And in that single contrast, polish against vulnerability, indifference against fear, the heart of this case revealed itself. Judge Frank Caprio watched the scene unfold with a quiet heaviness. He had seen thousands of family disputes across decades. He had witnessed bitterness, betrayal, and the slow unraveling of relationships worn thin by time. Yet something about Madison's detachment, her scrolling through her phone, her refusal to look at her mother, her complete dismissal of the moment, felt different. It struck him as a deeper wound, one that reached beyond legal documents or medical records. It was a wound carved by choice. Dorothy broke the silence first. Her voice trembled like an old violin string, delicate but still capable of carrying truth. "Madison, sweetheart, why am I here? I want to go home to my garden. My roses need watering. Mrs. Chen is expecting me for tea." Her words were simple, ordinary even, but the room felt those words the way one feels an old photograph full of a life that mattered. Madison didn't look up, not even for a moment. She answered with the tone one uses for a difficult client, not a mother. "Mom, your house is gone. We've talked about this. You're safer at the nursing home." Safer. The word hung in the air with a coldness that didn't match the warmth in Dorothy's eyes. Safer. From what? From memories, from independence, or from interfering with Madison's carefully curated lifestyle. Judge Caprio shifted gently in his seat, sensing the layers behind that single sentence. He opened the case file. Pages of financial records, medical notes, bank statements, appraisals, all pointing to one disturbing pattern: decisions made quickly, quietly, and with remarkable benefit to one person. "Ms. Whitmore," he began, "witness statements indicate you sold your mother's home without her full understanding. Did you explain the transaction completely before she signed the documents?" Madison's answer came smooth, almost rehearsed. "Of course, Your Honor. Everything I did was for her protection. She's not mentally capable of managing her finances." It was the first of many contradictions. If Dorothy wasn't capable of making decisions, how could she have fully understood the sale of a home she lived in for 52 years? Dorothy's eyes filled with confusion as she whispered, "I never wanted to sell my house. Robert built my kitchen cabinets with his own hands. Where will my roses grow now? The courtroom grew still. A mother's memories sat across from a daughter's convenience, and the distance between them felt miles wide. This was no longer just a legal problem. It was a story of a home lost, a trust broken, and a daughter who had forgotten the weight of her mother's sacrifices. And Judge Caprio knew the truth beneath these choices would only become harder to hear. The tension in the room deepened as Judge Frank Caprio turned another page in the file, his reading glasses resting low on his nose. Every detail he uncovered seemed to carve the distance between mother and daughter even wider. Yet Madison remained unmoved. She sat upright, scrolling her phone with the same disinterest she might show while browsing a cafe menu. Dorothy, on the other hand, watched everything with the anxious eyes of someone trying to understand a world that kept shifting without warning. Mrs. Whitmore, Judge Caprio asked gently, "Did you know your home was being sold?" Dorothy blinked, uncertain. I remember signing papers, Your Honor, but Madison said it was for medical bills. She said we couldn't keep the house unless I signed quickly. Her voice cracked under the weight of that memory. I thought I was protecting my family. A ripple of sorrow moved through the gallery. It was the kind of moment that reminded everyone that exploitation rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as help. Madison finally looked up, her voice clipped and dismissive. Mom gets confused easily. She mixes up details. The doctor said her dementia makes her remember things out of order. But Judge Caprio had heard something new. Something troubling in the way Madison spoke. Not about her mother, but around her, as if Dorothy were an obstacle instead of a person. He leaned forward. Ms. Whitmore, according to the city's financial records, there were no overdue taxes, no debt collections, no foreclosure threats. All payments were current. Madison's jaw tightened. There were other debts. Hospital bills, utilities, emergency expenses. The judge scanned the documents again. These bank statements show your mother had over $100,000 in savings. No outstanding balances. No unpaid utilities. Everything appears in order. The truth began to surface not in what Madison said, but in what she couldn't explain. Dorothy shifted in her wheelchair, bracing herself with her good hand. Your Honor, I always paid my bills. Robert taught me to keep everything organized. I used to keep the receipts in a blue shoebox under the sink. She smiled faintly, remembering simpler times. I don't know why Madison said things were falling apart. Her daughter pressed her lips together. Mom, please, you're not remembering things correctly. But the room saw the moment clearly. Dorothy remembered the life she lived, not perfectly, but honestly. And dishonesty wasn't in her voice. It was in the silence that followed Madison's words. Judge Caprio took a slow breath, then asked the question that had been building since the hearing began. Ms. Whitmore, why was a nursing home necessary if your mother had no significant financial strain and no serious medical decline? Madison hesitated, and in that hesitation, the courtroom felt the truth wobble. I had no time to care for her. My business requires travel, meetings, clients. She needs supervision I can't provide. There it was not medical necessity, not safety, but convenience. So institutional care was the easier option for you, Judge Caprio said, his voice steady. It was the best professional care available, she snapped back. But the gallery heard something different. They heard a daughter who valued efficiency more than empathy. Dorothy wiped a tear from her cheek. Your Honor, I can still cook. I can water my roses. Mrs. Chen checks on me every day. I'm not helpless. Not yet. Her voice softened to a whisper. I just wanted to stay home. The judge closed the file. Every line he had read, every contradiction he had heard, every pained expression on Dorothy's face pointed toward the same conclusion. Something far more deliberate was happening beneath the paperwork. This wasn't mismanagement. This wasn't confusion. This was a pattern. Madison leaned back in her chair, still clinging to her confidence. But for the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes, as if she sensed the fortress she built around her decisions was beginning to crack. And Judge Caprio knew the next step would expose exactly what lay hidden beneath those cracks. The turning point arrived quietly, so quietly that for a moment, no one in the room realized everything was about to change. Judge Frank Caprio closed the financial records and nodded toward a woman seated in the front row. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, but her presence carried the weight of someone who understood more than she wished she did. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the judge said, please approach. Madison stiffened. Until now, she had spoken as though her words alone could bend. Reality could reshape her mother's memories, reinterpret financial documents. justify decisions that had harmed the very person who once protected her. But this doctor, the one who truly understood Dorothy's medical history, represented a truth she could not control. Dr. Martinez took the stand with the quiet confidence of a professional who had seen the human side of decline and of dignity. She placed her hands gently on the witness stand and waited for the judge's question. Dr. Judge Caprio began, based on your evaluations, what is Mrs. Whitmore's current cognitive condition? The courtroom leaned forward. Your Honor. Dr. Martinez said, her tone measured but unmistakably firm. Mrs. Whitmore has mild to moderate dementia. That means she may struggle with complex tasks on difficult days, but she remains fully capable of making her own personal decisions. She does not require institutional care at this time. The words landed like a stone, clear, simple, unshakable. Madison's expression hardened. Doctor, you told me she needed supervision for safety. You said she wasn't functioning independently. But Dr. Martinez didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady, compassionate, yet unwavering. I recommended light assistance, she clarified. Medication reminders, meal preparation, occasional safety checks. I never recommended a nursing home. In fact, premature institutionalization can worsen her condition. The gallery murmured. Some shook their heads. Others exchanged looks that carried both sadness and anger. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. To be clear, Doctor, was there any medical necessity for a $6,000 a month nursing facility? None, Your Honor. Mrs. Whitmore is safest and healthiest in her own home or in a familiar environment with minimal support. Dorothy's eyes brightened just softly, but enough that the room felt it. I knew I could still take care of myself, she whispered. I've been doing my own recipes for years. My roses. They know me. Madison exhaled sharply, a thin line of frustration cutting across her face. Your Honor, she forgets things. She leaves the stove on. She gets confused. I acted responsibly. But now the cracks were no longer cracks, they were openings revealing what lay beneath her explanations. Judge Caprio asked Ms. Whitmore, you insisted your mother lacked capacity, yet you considered her competent enough to sign away her home. A single heavy silence filled the entire room. The contradiction, obvious, inescapable, stood between them like a cold truth finally freed from its hiding place. Madison tried to recover. She had good days and bad days. The sale happened on a good day, but her voice wavered. Even she heard the weakness in her own reasoning. Dorothy looked at her daughter with tearful disbelief. Madison, why would you say I'm not able to live at home but able to give away everything I have? The question was simple, but it cut deeper than any legal argument. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Madison's confidence faltered. Her shoulders softened. The muscles in her jaw unclenched. The room saw not a polished businesswoman, but a daughter caught in the truth she tried so hard to bury. Judge Caprio closed his file. Ms. Whitmore, he said quietly, at this point, the issue is no longer confusion. It is intent. The gallery froze. Intent meant motive. And motive meant everything was about to change. In that moment, the distance between mother and daughter wasn't measured in feet, but in choices, and in the painful realization that love had been overshadowed by something far more dangerous. And Judge Caprio knew the case had reached the moment where justice would finally speak. The courtroom had grown so quiet that even the soft rustle of paper felt intrusive. Everyone sensed the moment had come, the moment when Judge Frank Caprio would weigh not just evidence, but the fragile bond between a mother and her daughter. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, carried both gravity and sorrow. Ms. Whitmore, he began. You've told this court you acted out of responsibility, but responsibility without compassion becomes something else entirely. Madison stared straight ahead, her confidence now little more than a fading shadow. For the first time that morning, she looked small, smaller than the luxury she'd wrapped herself in, smaller than the choices she had tried to justify. Judge Caprio continued, the weight of his words settling over everyone present. You convinced your mother she was incapable of living independently, yet insisted she was competent enough to sign away the home she cherished for 52 years. You placed her in an institution she did not medically require, and you personally benefited from the sale of her property. The gallery felt a collective ache, an ache born from watching a daughter forget the meaning of family. Dorothy wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her silence was its own testimony, the silence of a mother who had loved faithfully and been met with betrayal. Judge Caprio nodded gently toward her before handing down his ruling. First, he said, your mother's home sale is voided. It will be restored to her ownership in full. Any profits you gained from the below-market sale must be returned. Madison inhaled sharply, the sound harsh in the still room. Second, the judge continued, you will reimburse her nursing home costs $36,000 to correct the burden placed upon her. He paused, letting the number settle. But it was not the money that struck Madison hardest. It was the realization of accountability. Third, your power of attorney is revoked. From this moment forward, an independent guardian will oversee your mother's finances. Trust once broken must be earned back, not assumed. A soft gasp moved through the courtroom. It was as if everyone had been waiting for justice to breathe again. And finally, Judge Caprio said, his tone gentler. Now you will arrange appropriate home care services for your mother while she transitions back into the life she prefers. You will also attend weekly elder care counseling, not as punishment, but as a chance to understand what your mother has given you and what you nearly lost. Madison's face fell, not with anger, but with something heavier. Recognition. Shame. The slow dawning truth that the most expensive thing she had ever risked was not her business, but her mother's love. Dorothy looked at her daughter, her eyes filled not with triumph, but with heartbreak, softened by hope. A mother's love rarely dies. It bends, it breaks, but it waits. Judge Caprio closed his notes gently. Justice, Ms. Whitmore, is not here to destroy you. It is here to remind you of the duty we owe those who once protected us. His words lingered in the air like a final chord, steady, honest, unforgettable. 6 months later, the world around Dorothy Whitmore looked different, quieter, gentler, and finally her own again. Morning light sifted through the curtains of the home she once feared she had lost forever. Outside, her rose garden swayed in the breeze, blooming with the familiar reds and soft pinks she had tended for decades. She leaned over the petals with steady hands, inhaling the scent of a life restored. Near the fence, Mrs. Chen waved, holding 2 steaming cups of tea. It was the small ritual Dorothy had missed the most, the kind of daily kindness money could never buy. And now, with the help of a home care aide who treated her like family, Dorothy moved through her days with dignity, safety, and the gentle rhythm of someone whose life had finally returned to its rightful place. But the real transformation lay in the footsteps approaching from the back gate. Madison visited every week, slowly, at first awkwardly, as if learning to speak a new language. She no longer arrived in designer dresses or with the hardened posture of someone protecting her pride. These days, she came carrying groceries, folding laundry, or quietly sweeping the porch without being asked. Some afternoons, she simply sat beside her mother, listening, really listening for the first time. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. It returns in small gestures, a softened voice, a shared meal, a daughter reaching out not for convenience, but for forgiveness. And Dorothy, with the grace only a mother can offer, welcomed her back each time, as if love were something that could be watered and revived just like the roses blooming at her feet. Judge Caprio reflected on the case months later while writing his final notes. When love is traded for greed, justice must step in not only to correct the wrong, but to restore the humanity that was lost along the way. His words spoke not just to the legal victory, but to something deeper, the understanding that the greatest inheritance isn't a house or money or business success. It's the assurance that the people we love will honor us when we can no longer fight for ourselves. Dorothy didn't regain her home because of wealth or influence. She regained it because the truth mattered, because compassion mattered, because someone was willing to stand for her when she no longer had the strength to stand alone. And Madison learned painfully but honestly that dignity cannot be purchased or negotiated. It can only be protected. As the camera fades on Dorothy's quiet backyard, her roses sway again, symbols of the life she reclaimed and the daughter she hopes to guide back towards something truer than ambition. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes that family should never be abandoned for convenience. And if you still have a parent whose hands once held yours, call them today. Some bonds are worth more than anything money could ever promise.